The snow fell like a delicate blanket over the streets of New York, softening the noise of the city that never sleeps. Henry Dalton, one of America's most successful businessmen, walked alone through Central Park. He wore an expensive coat, but that cold night seemed to cut through the fine wool like a knife, reaching his already frozen heart. Henry had everything: fame, wealth, and a top spot on the list of the country's most influential young people. Yet, what should have been a perfect life left him feeling empty. It was Christmas Eve, and while people around him carried bags of gifts, he felt out of place. He had no one to share the night with, only a mansion waiting for him, vast and lifeless. His personal assistant had arranged a luxury dinner with the finest dishes prepared by a renowned chef, but Henry canceled it all. Something inside him screamed for change. At that moment, he remembered something his grandmother used to say before she passed away. The true spirit of Christmas isn't in the gifts, but in the people we touch with our hearts. He used to laugh at the idea as a young man, believing success and money were enough for anyone. But now he questioned everything. Determined to step out of his bubble of privilege, Henry devised a plan as impulsive as it was unusual. He dressed in simple clothes, a worn coat, faded jeans, and second-hand boots bought just for this occasion. He left his Rolex and phone behind in the mansion, carrying only a few small bills to seem convincing. He wanted to see the real world, to understand how people lived when everything wasn't at their fingertips. Walking through the humbler neighborhoods of Brooklyn, Henry saw something he'd never noticed before. Families gathering in modest homes, laughing and singing around simple tables. Children ran through the snow, their smiles wide as if the cold didn't matter. Even in poverty, these people seemed to have something that he, with all the money in the world, couldn't buy. After walking for hours, his feet began to ache, and the biting wind made his hands tremble. That's when he saw Clara, a woman who looked exhausted but had a kind expression. She carried heavy grocery bags, struggling to balance them while holding onto the arm of a small boy, probably her son. When she slipped on an icy patch of sidewalk, Henry ran over to help her, catching one of the fallen bags. "Thank you," Clara said breathlessly. "It's so hard to walk with all this on the ice." Henry just smiled, trying to maintain his disguise as an ordinary man. "Don't worry. I saw you slip and wanted to help. Do you live around here?" Clara asked, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Henry hesitated for a moment before answering. "Not exactly. I'm kind of lost. I don't have anywhere to go tonight." Clara looked at him with a mix of surprise and compassion. Even though she had so little, she'd never turn away someone who seemed to be in need. "Well, I don't know if we have much, but you're welcome to join us for dinner," she said with a warm smile. Before Henry could reply, the boy at Clara's side, his eyes bright with curiosity, held out his hand. "I'm Tom. Do you like cookies? We made a bunch this afternoon." Tom's innocent gesture caught Henry completely off guard. He had never experienced such genuine generosity. Without fully understanding why, he accepted the invitation. That night, Henry stepped into a small house decorated with simple ornaments but overflowing with love. And for the first time in many years, he felt something begin to thaw deep inside him. When Henry stepped into Clara's house, he was immediately enveloped by a welcoming warmth that felt entirely new to him. The living room was small but bursting with life. The walls were decorated with Christmas ornaments made of paper and ribbons, clearly crafted by the children's hands. A modest Christmas tree stood in the corner, adorned with twinkling lights and makeshift decorations. There was no luxury, but the atmosphere radiated genuine warmth and joy. Tom, the 8-year-old boy, dashed into the kitchen and returned with a tray of cookies. "Here, try one. I helped make these," he said with a proud grin. Henry picked up a cookie and took a bite. He noticed it was burnt around the edges and soft in the center but smiled and said, It's delicious, Tom. You're a fantastic baker. Clara chuckled as she took his coat and hung it near the door. I hope you don't mind the mess. With 3 kids, keeping the house tidy is almost impossible. Along with Tom, there was Sophie, a sweet 10-year-old who loved to draw and eagerly showed Henry her handmade Christmas cards. And then there was little Ben, just 5, who eyed Henry warily at first but eventually warmed up and started playing with the laces on his boots. Henry was struck by the energy and happiness of these children, despite the clearly humble conditions they lived in. Mom, is dinner ready yet? Sophie asked, peeking into the kitchen. Almost, sweetheart, Clara replied as she set plates on the table. Henry, I hope you don't mind something simple. We've made vegetable soup and fresh bread. Henry looked at the food with gratitude. He was used to extravagant dinners prepared by world-class chefs, but there was something extraordinary about this humble meal. As he sat down at the table with the family, he realized he had never experienced such an honest and heartfelt dinner. They prayed before eating, giving thanks for what they had, and Henry felt a pang in his heart as he compared this scene to the empty Christmases he used to spend in his mansion. Do you have kids, Henry? Clara asked as she ladled the soup. He shook his head, smiling. No, honestly, I've never given it much thought. And your family? Where are they? Sophie chimed in, her innocent curiosity shining through. For a moment, Henry felt uncomfortable. He didn't want to reveal his true identity or the loneliness that his wealth had brought him. They're far away. Everyone went their own way. Clara seemed to sense something in his tone and shifted the topic. Well, tonight you're part of our family. That's what matters. The meal was simple but filled with laughter and stories. Tom told Henry about his dream of becoming a soccer player, while Sophie showed off her drawings and talked about her aspiration to be an artist. Ben, the youngest, fell asleep in Clara's lap before dinner was even over. Later, as the children played a board game on the living room floor, Clara and Henry talked in the kitchen. She shared how she was a widow working as a clerk at a neighborhood bakery. Despite the challenges, she did everything she could to ensure her children had a happy childhood. It's not easy, but Christmas always reminds us that being together is what truly matters, Clara said while washing dishes. Henry watched her, amazed by her strength and resilience. Clara had so little, yet she managed to give so much. For the first time in years, he felt something he couldn't quite name. Maybe it was gratitude, or perhaps it was the start of an internal transformation. When the night came to an end, Clara set up a place for Henry to sleep on the couch. The makeshift bed was simple, but to him, it felt like one of the most comfortable spots in the world. As the Christmas tree lights twinkled softly in the corner, Henry closed his eyes and felt a peace that had eluded him for so long. Before drifting off to sleep, he overheard Clara softly whispering to Sophie, "Whenever we can help someone, even if it's just a little, we're doing the right thing. That's what Christmas is all about." Those words echoed in Henry's mind as he surrendered to sleep. For the first time, he began to question his own life and what truly gave it meaning. Waking up on Christmas morning at Clara's house was, for Henry, an unexpectedly magical experience. He opened his eyes to the sound of children's laughter. Sophie, Tom, and Ben were gathered around the Christmas tree, unwrapping small presents that Clara had clearly saved up for. There were no expensive toys or state-of-the-art gadgets, but the kids reacted with contagious joy. "Look, Mom, a new box of colored pencils," Sophie exclaimed, hugging Clara tightly. Tom, clutching a soccer ball, jumped up and down with excitement, while little Ben held a plastic toy truck, grinning from ear to ear. Henry stood there, watching the scene, a lump forming in his throat. He tried to remember the last time he had felt this kind of simple, genuine happiness. Clara noticed the distant look on Henry's face and walked over, offering him a cup of coffee. "You okay?" He smiled, almost sheepishly. "Yeah, it's just, I think I forgot what a real Christmas feels like." Clara looked at him with understanding but didn't push. She just patted his shoulder lightly before returning to the children. Henry, however, felt the weight of that morning. Clara and her kids had so little, yet there was an emotional richness here that he'd never experienced. Later, as Henry helped Clara prepare Christmas lunch, a new experience for him, as he was used to everything being served by staff, he learned more about her life. You know, sometimes, when things get tough, I wonder if I'm doing enough for them, Clara said, skillfully chopping potatoes. But then I remind myself that as long as we're together, we can get through anything. Henry paused for a moment, holding a bowl of vegetables. That sentence echoed in his mind. While he spent millions on projects that often meant nothing to him, Clara struggled to provide the basics for her children, and still managed to create a home full of love. After lunch, Henry decided to take a walk around the neighborhood to think. He needed time alone to process everything he was feeling. As he strolled through the snow-covered streets, he saw children playing, neighbors exchanging warm greetings, and families gathered around simple tables. It was as if the entire neighborhood pulsed with an energy he had never felt in his world of luxury and isolation. When he returned to Clara's house, he found Sophie and Tom drawing at the table. Sophie had drawn their family, herself, Clara, the brothers, and even Henry, wearing his old coat and sitting on the couch. He smiled at the sight, but his heart tightened all the same. "That's beautiful, Sophie," he said, pointing at the drawing. "You're part of the family now, you know?" She replied with an innocent smile. Those simple words hit him like a thunderclap. He, who had everything, was now being seen as part of a humble family that had so little. And the most surprising part, he liked how that felt. As night fell, Henry offered to help Clara clean up the kitchen. While washing dishes, he asked the question that had been nagging at him all day. "Clara, if you could change one thing about your life, what would it be?" She paused for a moment, thinking, then answered with a smile. "I don't think I'd change much. Sure, having a little more stability would be nice, but everything I need is already here. My kids, our home, and the hope that tomorrow will be better." Henry fell silent, absorbing her words. Clara had no idea who he really was, but she had just given him one of the most valuable lessons of his life. That night, while everyone else slept, Henry lay awake on the couch, staring at the softly twinkling Christmas tree in the dark. He knew he had to do something for this family, not just because he had the means to, but because he wanted to. For the first time in a long time, he felt the desire to do something truly meaningful. With that in mind, he began to plan quietly. Tomorrow would be a new beginning, not just for Clara and her children, but for him too. The next morning, Henry woke up before everyone else. He knew it was time to return to his reality and put his plan into action. Before leaving, he left a small handwritten note on the kitchen table. "Thank you for welcoming me and showing me what truly matters. I'll be back soon." As he stepped through the door, Henry felt his heart heavy but resolute. He returned to his mansion, where everything felt cold and lifeless, a stark contrast to Clara's warm and lively home. There, he immediately summoned his trusted team. Though reluctant to reveal the exact reason, he explained that he wanted to change the life of one specific family. Henry had more than enough money for this and more, but this time, it wasn't just a generous gesture. It was personal. Within days, he had planned a series of actions to be carried out in secret. First, he ensured Clara would never have to worry about her home again. He purchased the small property where she lived and arranged for a complete renovation, including new furniture, a modern heating system, and even a special bedroom for each of the children. Everything would be done while she was away, so she wouldn't suspect a thing. Next, he created an investment fund in the children's names, ensuring they'd have access to the best education possible. Sophie would receive professional art supplies, Tom would get quality sports equipment, and Ben would have everything he needed to explore his curiosities as he grew up. Finally, Henry prepared a special gift for Clara, a new job. He quietly bought the bakery where she worked and turned it into a small network of cafes. Clara would be promoted to regional manager, with a fair salary and enough free time to dedicate to her family. A few days later, Henry returned to the Brooklyn neighborhood. When Clara opened the door, she looked surprised but genuinely happy to see him. "You came back," she said with a warm smile. "I told you I would," he replied, stepping inside. The house was just as he remembered, filled with the smell of fresh coffee and the sound of children playing. Henry brought bags of gifts for everyone, but he had something much bigger to share. While the children tore into the wrapping paper, Henry looked at Clara and said, "I need to talk to you about something." They sat at the small kitchen table, the same place where everything had begun. Henry started speaking, his tone serious but full of emotion. "Clara, I haven't been completely honest with you. I'm not exactly who you think I am. My name is Henry Dalton, and, well, I'm a businessman. A very wealthy one." He paused, watching her reaction. Clara blinked a few times, confused but silent. He continued, "That night we met, I was trying to understand something I lost a long time ago. What it means to have a real connection. You and your kids showed me that. You gave me something no amount of money could ever buy." Still surprised, Clara murmured, "Henry, you didn't have to do anything for us. Your presence was enough." He shook his head, smiling gently. "But I needed to, so I did a few things. You deserve so much more than what you have. And I want you to know you'll never have to struggle alone again." Before Clara could respond, Henry handed her an envelope. Inside were documents explaining everything he had done: the house renovation, the funds for the children, and her promotion at work. Clara sat in silence for a long moment, reading and processing it all. When she finally looked up, there were tears in her eyes. "Why?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Because you showed me what really matters," Henry replied softly. "You gave me a gift I can never fully repay. This is just the beginning." Clara pulled him into a hug, gratitude pouring out of her with every tear that slipped down her face. The children, curious, came running to see what was happening, and Clara gathered them into the embrace. In that moment, Henry realized his life had changed forever. He hadn't just transformed the lives of this family, they had transformed his. Weeks later, the transformation was complete. Clara's little house now looked like something out of a fairy tale. The facade was freshly renovated, the roof repaired, and the windows gleamed with new curtains. Inside, every detail reflected a careful, loving touch. The children had rooms decorated to match their personalities. Sophie's was filled with soft pastel colors and an easel for painting. Tom got a bed shaped like a soccer field, and little Ben, who adored toy cars, had a racetrack laid out across the floor. The day Clara and the kids returned home after a surprise trip to the city, arranged by Henry, they stood frozen at the doorway, stunned. The children bolted inside, racing to explore their new rooms, shouting with joy at every discovery. Clara stood still in the living room, her hands covering her mouth as tears ran freely down her cheeks. "Henry, this is unbelievable," she murmured, unable to express the whirlwind of emotions she felt. Henry smiled, his hands tucked into his coat pockets. "I just wanted to give back a little of what you gave me, but that wasn't all." In the center of the room, another envelope sat on the table, marked with Clara's name. With trembling hands, she opened it to find documents outlining her new position as manager of the bakery chain. Alongside that, there was a check, an initial bonus, that would allow her to pay off old debts and start building a more stable future for her children. Clara shook her head in disbelief. "You did all this, For us? Henry nodded. You gave me a gift I didn't know I needed. A home, even if only for a short time. And now, I want to make sure you never have to struggle alone again. Tom, who had been listening while clutching his new soccer ball, ran to Henry and hugged him tightly. You're like Santa Claus, only better. Everyone laughed, and for the first time in a long while, Henry felt a deep, genuine joy. Clara invited him to stay for dinner, as she always did, and that night's meal felt different. The food was still simple, but the air buzzed with renewed hope. The children played with their new gifts while Clara and Henry talked about plans for the future. In the days that followed, Henry became increasingly involved in the family's life. He visited regularly, attending Tom's soccer practices, encouraging Sophie to paint more, and even helping Ben set up racetracks for his toy cars. He wasn't just the distant benefactor who had changed their lives. He had become part of them. At the same time, Henry began to change his own life. He decided to use his wealth to create a greater impact in the world. Inspired by Clara and her children, he launched a foundation dedicated to helping families in need, ensuring they had access to housing, education, and employment opportunities. The following Christmas, Henry organized a celebration for the entire neighborhood. He decorated the streets with twinkling lights and ornaments, set up a towering Christmas tree in the town square, and brought food and gifts for everyone. Clara and the children were by his side, helping to organize everything. Little Sophie even designed the invitations for the event, which Henry had printed in bulk. That night, as carols filled the air and laughter echoed around the tree, Clara approached Henry. I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done, she said softly. Henry looked at her with a calm, sincere smile. You already have. When you welcomed me that night, you saved more than my Christmas. You saved my life. Clara smiled back, squeezing his hand for a moment. They stood in silence, watching the tree's twinkling lights and listening to the joyful sounds of the children. Henry knew he could never go back to being the man he was before that night when he met Clara. He had found something that neither money, nor success, nor fame could ever provide: purpose. And on that Christmas, surrounded by his new family and the community he had helped transform, Henry finally discovered what he had been searching for all along: a sense of belonging.